Hello everybody, welcome and kumusta. Thank you for joining me. This is How Your Occupational Therapist and welcome to OT Conversations. Today, I want us to have a conversation and talk about something that's happening in hospitals, especially when patients are being transferred from one trust to another. And this is our practice in what I call it the verbal handover. Yeah, this phone call that we do, that you can say, oh, I'll just phone the next trust and then we'll quickly run through the patient with you. Yeah, so we'll talk about that. And this is my take on this practice, and this is very plain and simple take. I say that if we have an appropriate documentation style and strategy, and there is a good system of relaying the therapy notes to the receiving trust, then the routine verbal therapy handover is no longer necessary. Yeah. So not only that, sometimes I think that it can actually be more of a problem as well. Now let me explain this, because I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking the handover is for safety. It's a practice that we do all the time. And you're probably thinking, oh, what if they don't read my notes? Or what if the notes don't get transferred? Or you're probably saying, perhaps I can say it faster than they can find it. And I hear it. These are the things that would run at the back of our head. But let's slow down and let's ask a better question on this side, right? So what is verbal handover trying to address and solve? Yeah. Most of the time, verbal handover is really not solving a patient problem. What it does is it's trying to address a system problem. It's a workaround, and I want us to just be honest about that. Yeah. When we do verbal handovers, what you're doing is that you're creating a what I call a shadow knowledge. Yeah. Shadow knowledge being information that lives on people's heads in memory based on recall, and it live on a I told someone already and I think I mentioned it. So it's really all abstract, and it's very, very scary. And the concern and the problem with this shadow knowledge is this: it is not recorded. Even when you say you've done the verbal handover and you put that back in the notes, but you'll just repeat whatever it is that's supposed to be written in the notes, right? So, yeah. So it's not recorded, and when it is not recorded, therefore, it is not accountable. It's a waste of time. You cannot audit it properly, and you can't trace what was actually said. And if something goes wrong, nobody can really confidently say that it is what's been done in the handover. Therefore, I pass on the problem to you, and that's what you have received. So it's almost like putting a blame all the time. So while we call it safety, sometimes it just becomes ambiguity dressed as safety, right? So that's one. Another one, listen to this concept and this perspective, right? If the system is good, the verbal handover becomes redundant. You don't need to do it. In an ideal world, yeah? So just say there is an ideal world out there. The therapy notes are accessible to the receiving trust. Documentation would be structured. The key therapy risks and needs are visible, and it's easily accessible to everybody. And there would be a very consistent way to find what is important. And in this ideal world, why would you need to do another phone call, right? And why would phone call? How can phone call add to it? It's just another process and it's another system. It's really, it does my head in. So where people are insisting on verbal handover as a routine practice, it's it's almost like it's habit. It's almost like a confession. It's almost a confession that we don't fully trust the system and the pathway, and that's the one that we need to address. So we don't trust that the notes, that the information gets given to the receiving trust, and that our system, like I said, is just not reliable. And again, it's not a therapy problem. It is a governance and information and system problem. Yeah. And that's why this is the first thing that I addressed when I started working in a facility where I am right now. I wanted to make sure that the notes are properly done and written so that you really don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it when you go home, because all of the information, whether you come to work the following day or not, all of the information is something that you've already conveyed in the notes. And so the receiving therapist on the day-to-day practice and the day-to-day work, they'd be able to make that decision straight away based on the notes that you've done if you followed the procedure that I asked you to do. So what's the real issue? People call because they do not trust the transfer. Yeah. So what are the reasons for verbal handover? Why do we do it? Why do people do it? One problem, perhaps, although I have not been auditing this anymore, but perhaps notes don't transfer on time. Especially back in the days, patients go, all the notes go in a paper, printed in a folder, in an envelope, and then they go. But now there are multiple digital systems that's happening. It still is a printout for some. So from one system to another, it just doesn't communicate. So reason one, the notes, they do not transfer on time. Reason two, maybe the receiving trust do not have access on the record. Most of the time, the receiving trust will have a basic access, which would be medical notes and the discharge summary, right? But from a perspective of therapy, what was done and what the patient's been doing, sometimes that gets left, and they only get given, the receiving trust is only getting the last therapy entry rather than the entire picture. So it really is important to have that. Right. Reason number three, the documentation is probably too long, very messy, and very much buried. So many unnecessary things that if you look at it, you don't want to read it. And that's a common problem that's happening, right? Reason number four, people are anxious, and because nobody wants the patient to suffer actually from the gaps. And that's why you still do the verbal handover, right? So what do? We call the receiving trust. But here's the thing. If that is the practice, and it still is the practice, then verbal handover really, guys, is just not the best practice at all. What it is just a patch. You're just patching problems. It's just like the road nowadays. There are so many potholes. That's what that does. And yeah, we need to address that. So what we actually need as a group and as therapists, we need to have a minimum therapy transfer summary. So instead of arguing phone call versus no phone call, let's start thinking about a good therapy transfer notes, or when they are discharged, a therapy transfer document where you write down, here's the patient, I have seen this patient and was referred over to me for this particular reason, and then when the patient was transferred to me, when they were under my care, this was their status, and these were the problems that I've been addressing throughout their stay, and then I have done this intervention, and on discharge the patient was in receipt of this amount of therapy input from me, and the outcome was this is the person's ability, right? So there is a data transfer. So in short, this is the data transfer. It's there. It's not new. It's actually very old. That's been forgotten practice, and I don't know why we're building on habits, or we're fighting against habits here. So therapy data set, that's very important. What's important when you transfer somebody over? The baseline. You need to have at least a description of who the person is, occupational baseline, the story, their backstory, their environment, their social setup, their equipment, so they don't have to ask those things again, right? It is important to describe their current function and their functional abilities from an occupational therapy perspective, because ADLs in an acute hospital is always and has always been our concern anyway, right? So transfer function, what would be their transfer function? Their functional mobility. What about their personal care abilities, washing, dressing, toilet hygiene, functional mobility, emergency response, medication routine? So there you go. And what would be, so that's their ability, whether they can and can't do. What would be the assistance that they need? Yeah, do they need supervision, hands-on setup, assistance of one, assistance of two? So that would be part of their ADL description anyway, if you're going to do that, because we quantify independence by the amount of help people are getting. And then you can write down what would be the risks, highlight the risks. Are they a false risks? Are they impulsive? Is there compliance concern? So write down all of those in the best way that you can. Write down about the equipment status as well. That's very useful. If it is being used in the hospital, like for example, current equipment need based on the current level of care, walking aid, hospital bed, supportive chair, transit wheelchair, based on the current need. Then your objective would be for the receiving trust to explore whether they still need that on discharge, and it's up to them to request and order it. Or equally, if a person's been discharged or you've ordered some equipment, let them know that you have ordered the equipment and that it is due to be delivered, or you're asking for them to follow up whether it gets delivered or not. Yeah. Now, you can write down things that work and things that don't work. Now this would be like a subjective handover in the notes. It's almost like little nuances, right? Like one time there is a patient who I have been working with and was very, very difficult to engage, and I stated there that, you know, a good technique would be to start working on, you know, on reading the Bible first, because the patient was very, very religious, and it was in the notes anyway, but I still do, because it's those are little nuances, but it is in the notes, right? What else? Therapy plan. That's very important to be in put in, obviously, and the outstanding actions as well, right? Now, don't get me wrong, there are, every now and again, there is a verbal handover, and it is appropriate, right? Even doctors, before they refer the patient over, they have to have that conversation, yeah? And that is, hey, at the end of the day, here's a patient, here's the case, and I'll pass on all the information, but there is a verbal acceptance of the referral, right? With therapy, we don't have any choice. Once they receive, they get it, right? They should be automatically referred as well. When is verbal handover appropriate? There are times when it is suitable. For example, when there is time-critical risk, like immediate safeguarding concerns, there is severe behavioral risk, there's repeated falls with an unclear cause, for example, or there is a like emergent or sudden cognitive instability. So this is very important because it gives protection to the people looking after the patient. So it's apart from the patient, your focus is really more on the receiving therapist as well. When you have high uncertainty, that's important, where the plan is likely to shift immediately as soon as the person arrives. Yeah. Normally, things like this be in critical care, right? Or if there is a complex equipment or safety critical setup where the risk misuse is quite high, so you need to do that. And if there is a known access failure where you already know that the receiving trust won't see the notes in time, okay? So you need to find ways on how to get the notes there. But the best way to get the notes there, the best type of handover is a written note. All right? But this is the rule. Follow this, guys. If it is worth the call, it is worth documenting. Yeah? And it's also worth documenting that call happened. The date, the time, who you spoke with, and the key points that you have provided. Otherwise, it would just be a shadow knowledge, just like what I said at the beginning of this talk. Now, let's answer an uncomfortable question. Are we calling other trust because we don't trust each other? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, for me personally, it's strictly professional. Doesn't really matter to me. But there are some whom I know they really prefer to have that handover because they would have this reassurance, right? Now, right, so my take regarding handover, verbal handover, and these phone calls, it remains. Routine therapy handover between trusts should be an exemption, right, on very special occasions, but it should not be the norm. When documentation is strong, remember this, if the way we write, if our documentation is strong and the transfer systems of the transfer of information is reliable, we don't need to do that. If the notes can't be accessed, then the solution is not through phone calls, okay? Find out ways on how we can get the information there. Structured transfer summaries, clarity of therapy documentation, that's the one thing that you need to improve. Okay, guys? Well, thank you for joining me. If you like this conversation, follow it up. There is a podcast that I have. It's OT Conversations. Look it up. Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, whatever you can access your podcast. So look it up, OT Conversations. And if you want to make it easier, it's HAO, H-A-O. Combine those in search and then you'll have that. All right, guys. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, talk to your friends, learn over a cup of tea, learn together, grow together. Just remember, anything you do matters and has an outcome. Until next time, guys. Bye.